Hello folks, this is a Jester Extra. It's a dull, miserable looking day. Okay, so let's just go through this, alright? It's an article from the Telegraph and it comes off of the back of the release of a new book called Time to Think, which was, gosh, it was overdue. But I'm so glad it's here now. I put the link to the book in the comments section below, not comments, description section below. But I'm going to take us through this article in the hope that those that haven't read it will perhaps just listen to what I'm saying, and that maybe what this article implies could in some way get people to understand that we need to undo the damage that has been done by ideologues and the ideologically deranged to some of the most vulnerable people in our society, and to gay, lesbian and autistic children. So I'll begin. It's written by Gordon Rayner, Associate Editor at The Telegraph. It's entitled The Tavistock Clinic Ignored Link Between Autism and Transgender Children. The Tavistock Clinic ignored evidence that 97.5% of children seeking sex changes had autism, depression, or other problems that might have explained their unhappiness, a new book claims. Staff at the NHS facility was so determined to push a pro-transgender policy that children who might not have been trans were treated as collateral damage by clinicians who labelled doubters transphobic, a whistleblower has said. Children that might not have been trans were treated as collateral damage. That's all of them. This trans nonsense has to end. There is no such thing as a trans child. That's it. It's just pure evil. 97.5% had autism. They were treated as collateral damage. Now, this is a whistleblower that's saying this. The book was written by an individual. It's going to need looking at, but I bet your bottom dollar that the lawyers had a very close look at this before they let it get out. 7. I knew about this, and lots of you know about this, but to see it written down so starkly is utterly devastating. 7 in 10 children had more than 5 associated features, such as abuse, anxiety, eating disorders, or bullying. And a social worker estimated that as few as 1 in 50 children treated at the clinic would have stayed transgender for life if they had not been given controversial drug therapy. Okay. And 80% of them were same-sex attracted. That's me, by the way. One clinical psychologist who worked at the Tavistock was horrified at the possibility that highly vulnerable children were wrongly being given irreversible drug treatments following referral by the Tavistock, but discussion of the subject was shut down by colleagues, she said. Stonewall, the LGBT Foundation, Mermaids, GLAD, the LGBT Consortium, every pride in the country. This needs to be investigated by the police. It is negligence, professional negligence, organisational negligence. It is negligence on a scale so vast that only the bringing of criminal charges will allow society to mend. The claims were made in Time to Think, the inside story of the collapse of the Tavistock's gendered service for children by Hannah Barnes, a BBC Newsnight journalist. which is published on February the 23rd. Hannah, I remember you've done work on this for a long time now. You've been absolutely tenacious. Absolutely tenacious. And we've had reviews of the book. We've had reviews of what's going on in the book, and they are universally glowing in terms of its precision, forensic analysis, and explanation in a way that people are going to be able to understand of exactly how, in 2023, we, collectively as the UK, allowed the medical experimentation of children, on children, to go on under our very noses. The book, which is based on more than 100 hours of interviews with clinicians and patients, paints a picture of a clinic that became overwhelmed by demand and came under the increasing influence of transgender charities. Children as young as 10 were referred to specialists with a view to them being prescribed puberty-blocking drugs, and others were referred after as little as 20 minutes consultation. How do you deal with such a collective failure as a nation? And how do we mend? How do you deal with such a collective failure? People have been calling and saying this is wrong for years, including me. But what was it about our society that allowed this to happen? What was it? What made us fall so easily for ideological derangements of this kind, and we continue to do so? What stopped us? What actually made this happen? How did this happen? It is absolutely right that we now see that this needs to be halted on every level, but how did we as a country allow this to happen? Allow it to escape the bonds and boundaries of academia and become an ideological cult that has damaged so many people? There needs to be a full and frank public inquiry who will judge, but will not by necessity be judgmental, every single player in this damned fiasco. The NHS Gender Identity Development Service for Children, or GIDS, GIDS as it's known, which is based at the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust in London, will close later this year after it was criticised in an independent review by Dr. Hilary Cass. It will be replaced by regional clinics after Dr. Cass said that having a single provider of service was not a safe or viable long-term option. I have serious concerns about what's going on with Dr. Hilary Cass, and I think if the government does not open this to scrutiny on a far wider tableau than the one that we currently are, Hilary Cass is going to do what people inside this do, with the best of intentions, and continue the myth of gender identity ideology, the trans child. They're going to continue that myth, and in doing so, they will fortify the stockade of queer theory, gender identity ideology, and every other filthy belief system that comes with something that has allowed us to mutilate and to medicalize and sterilize children who are autistic, gay, or mentally unwell. Cass is not big enough. There should be no new gender clinics. None. The book discloses that some staff at GIDS were concerned about the levels of autism and ADHD in children, referred to them and feared that they might be unnecessarily medicating autistic children. They knew. Less than 2% of children in the UK are thought to have an autism spectrum disorder, but according to GIDS' own data, 35% of its referrals present with moderate to severe autistic traits. This is eugenics in a nice, shiny new coat, wrapped in virtue, extolled by grief whores and those who would want to make themselves feel better while they exhibit and display their narcissistic compassion. Children referred to GIDS were 10 times more likely than the national average to have a registered sex offender as a parent. 10 times more likely. Well, gosh, what kind of parent would have a vested interest in keeping their child a child? This opens questions that we as a society must answer. How such a catastrophic failure in safeguarding was allowed to happen. How we did not recognise that the fetishization and the absolute ridiculous notion that you can make a mental health problem, i.e. a mental illness, into a bloody identity meant that the entire edifice of safeguarding was so crippled that the public sector NHS, the NHS, allowed itself to succumb not just to hurting people within the Tavistock clinic, not just hurting people within GIDS, but actually who have then went on to spread this through the NHS like the parasite it is. "42% of these children had lost a parent through death or separation, and as I've already said, 70% had more than 5 associated features." Anne Hutchinson, a former GIDS clinician and somebody else who blew the whistle, who was interviewed for the book, feared she may be contributing to a medical scandal where an NHS service was not stopping to think what else might be going on for so many of these vulnerable children. The author notes, only 2.5% of the children seen at the clinic had no associated problems, and I'll put that down to trans house, and by proxy it'll be the parents that will be pushing because they didn't want a gay child. The book's title, Time to Think, refers to the reason given by clinicians for referring children for puberty blockers. They claimed that by denying the onset of puberty, the children would have more time to think about what they wanted and discuss the cause of their unhappiness. However, in 2016 it emerged that nearly all of the children referred for assessment for puberty blockers went on to take cross-sex hormones, which would give the children some of the physical characteristics of the opposite sex. Those of you who have supported this particular ideology and done so through your own gullibility, you need to say you did that. You need to apologise for your own gullibility. You need to apologise to the people who have tried to warn you, to the friends that you've then said, I'm not going to be friends with you anymore. You need to apologise to those people. You need to find them and you need to say, I was wrong. Because that's how you will begin to heal. Because you are absolutely culpable in this. Inaction. In the face of child experimentation. Inaction. In the face of child mutilation. Inaction. In the face of child sterilisation. And inaction in the face of transing the gay away. Every single one of you needs to find whoever it was that was trying to warn you, that you cut off so that you could pretend that you were a virtuous person. You need to find and apologise to. Every single organisation that has made staff feel uncomfortable because they won't wear a lanyard or because they refuse to tell the lies that you're expecting them to tell when faced with this nonsense. You need to apologise to your staff. Dr. Hutchinson continues that she realised, Dr. Hutchinson said, told Miss Barnes in the book, that she realised that puberty blockers might have been confirming a trans identity rather than simply pausing puberty. And I was horrified because I just suddenly thought, oh God, oh God. She became concerned that GIDS was getting it wrong by referring children for assessment for puberty blockers who were traumatised, abused, autistic, or simply gay. But said that the finding on puberty blockers was brushed aside by staff. They ignored the science because they were ideologically captured. Andrew Walker, a former social worker at GIDS, who worked at a satellite clinic in Leeds, who spoke under an assumed name, estimated that only 2 or 3% of the children seen by staff would have continued to identify as transgender for life if they had not been referred for medical intervention. That means that 98% of the children that were referred by this organisation had their trans identity confirmed. It's iatrogenic. It is the harm. What they thought was the cure was the harm. And in doing so, 98% of those children are now damaged irreparably for life. They may well be a medical patient for life. And 80% of that 98% are same-sex attracted. They have literally been practicing conversion therapy. It then goes on to give some background. And then it allows kids to have a response. There is no response to this other than we're shutting and we're sorry. I'm sorry, I'm not taking it. And then mermaids have chipped in. You can see it in the article. I put it all out there for you to have a look. A spokesman for Mermaids said, while we advocate for the needs of transgender young people, that you bastards. Mermaid's focus is and always has been supporting our service users who are at present struggling with a lack of clarity from NHS England on future specialist gender services. They've been told that this is the mutilization and sterilisation and medicalization of autistic, gay, looked after, traumatised and abused children. And their concern is, when are the NHS going to get the scalpel out? We do not provide clinical advice, but rather emotional support. You don't supply emotional support. What you do is you perpetrate an iatrogenic process which damages the individuals that get caught up in it, and you maintain the myth of the trans child in order to keep your coffers full of money. I am sure and I hope that the book that's coming out, Time to Think, becomes a #1 bestseller, and that book is read by many, many people across the UK, and that they are finally fully able to understand that what is unfolding is a global medical scandal in which at the heart was the destruction of the lives of children. And then, once we get it, we can put gender identity ideology and queer theory, which drives it, to bed. Get it out of schools, get it out of universities, get it out of everywhere, and recognise it for the disgusting, disgraceful reincarnation of eugenics that it is. Go well.